Elena had known this about her mother-in-law from the very beginning, that Margaret Harlow was a woman who worshipped beautiful surfaces because she understood, better than anyone, how much ugliness they could hide. Her home was immaculate. Her manners were impeccable. Her smile arrived precisely on time, every time, like a servant who had been trained never to be late and never to speak unless spoken to. For 3 years, Elena had watched that smile and told herself it was simply a different kind of warmth, reserved, aristocratic, not cold, just contained. She had been wrong about that. She saw it now with the terrible clarity of someone who has finally stopped making excuses. The dinner table had been set with Margaret's usual theatrical precision. White linen so crisp it looked like it had never been touched. Sterling silver that caught the candlelight and threw it back in small, sharp glints. 8 people arranged around the table, like pieces in a game Elena hadn't. She was playing. Daniel's sister Priya sat across from Elena, her husband Raj beside her, both of them already wearing the careful, practiced expressions of people who had learned long ago that Margaret's dinners occasionally required emotional armor. Uncle Lionel was pouring himself a second glass of red before the first course had even arrived. The 2 women from Margaret's charity board, Sandra and June, both iron-haired, both perpetually composed, sat nearest to Margaret like loyal courtiers. And then there was Daniel, her husband, the man she had loved with the kind of love that reshapes you, that makes you hand over parts of yourself you didn't know you could give. He sat to her left, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his arm, and he had spent the first 20 minutes of dinner being charming and easy and completely, heartbreakingly normal. Elena was 14 weeks pregnant. The baby was the size of a lemon, according to the app she checked every morning with a private, tender ritual, her hand on her still flat stomach, her lips moving in something that wasn't quite prayer, but wasn't far from it either. She had told the family at 10 weeks. Margaret had smiled that smile. Elena had noticed it and filed it away and chosen, one final time, to let it go. She would not get that choice again. The days that followed the dinner did not feel like days. They felt like water, shapeless, cold, moving around Elena without her permission. She kept waiting for Daniel to say something, to come to her in the night and press his forehead to hers, the way he used to when the world felt too large, and say, "I'm sorry. She was wrong. You know I know that." She rehearsed her response 100 times. She would be gracious. She would be understanding. She would let him explain whatever complicated, suffocating loyalty to his mother had kept him silent at that table, and she would find a way to forgive it, because she loved him, and the baby was coming, and love, she still believed then, was supposed to be stronger than silence. He never came. What came instead were small, devastating revelations, arriving one after another like quiet knocks on a door she hadn't known existed. A text she wasn't meant to see, left open on the kitchen counter while Daniel showered. A message from Margaret that read, "She hasn't scheduled a second ultrasound yet. Doesn't that strike you as strange?" And below it, Daniel's response sent 3 days before the dinner. "I know. I've been thinking the same thing." Elena read it twice. Then she set the phone down exactly where she'd found it, walked to the bathroom, turned on the cold tap, and stood with her wrists under the running water until she could breathe again. He had been thinking the same thing. Her husband, the man who had held her hair back when the morning sickness was so violent she couldn't stand, who had driven 40 minutes at midnight to find the specific brand of crackers that didn't make her stomach turn. He had been thinking the same thing as his mother, had been, perhaps, thinking it first. Perhaps Margaret had not planted the seed at all. Perhaps Daniel had handed her the soil. She began to look back then, with the awful precision of a woman who had once been trained to build cases, to find patterns, to follow the thread no matter where it led. And what she found, unspooling slowly across the last 3 years of her marriage, was not a single betrayal, but an architecture of them, small, carefully constructed, designed to make Elena doubt herself long before anyone else was asked to doubt her. Margaret had been working on Daniel for years. Elena could see it now. The offhand comments at family gatherings that were never quite accusations, but always left a residue. "Elena seems tired lately. Is everything all right between you two? The way Margaret would call Daniel on evenings Elena had planned carefully for the two of them, and Daniel would take the call, and the evening would quietly dissolve. The Christmas when Margaret had given Elena a self-help book about finding purpose outside of ambition. Elena, who had graduated top of her law class, who had made partner track at 31 before she left the firm for Daniel, for this life, for love. She had given up so much for a man who had been quietly, incrementally, taught not to trust her. The miscarriage happened on a Tuesday. Daniel was in Vancouver. Margaret had arranged the trip, a business introduction, a connection in Daniel's industry, something that couldn't be moved. Elena had told him she felt off that morning, and he had kissed her forehead and said she was probably just tired and that his mother's friend was only available that one day. She had nodded. She had watched him pack. She lost the baby alone, on the bathroom floor, with no one to call who would arrive in time to matter. She called the doctor. She called a cab. She did not call Daniel until it was over, and when she heard his voice crack on the phone, when she heard what sounded like genuine grief, she felt something inside her go very, very quiet. Not numb, quieter than numb. The way a fire goes quiet right before it finds something new to burn. She did not leave immediately. That was the part no one would have predicted. Not Margaret, who expected either a dramatic exit or a tearful submission, and not Daniel, who seemed to be waiting for Elena to tell him what kind of husband he was supposed to be next. Elena gave them nothing. She moved through the apartment with the same quiet routine she had always kept. She made coffee in the mornings. She attended the follow-up appointments alone and said she was fine when Daniel asked, because fine was a word that revealed nothing and cost nothing and bought her exactly the time she needed. What she was actually doing, in the hours Daniel spent at the office and the evenings he spent on calls with his mother, was remembering who she was before she became his wife. She had been exceptional, once, in ways that had nothing to do with anyone else. She had graduated top of her class from Georgetown Law. She had spent 6 years at Mercer and Holt, one of the most aggressive white-collar litigation firms in the country, building a reputation for the kind of patient, meticulous case construction that made opposing counsel nervous from the moment discovery opened. She had been on partner track. Her supervising partner, Richard Ames, had told her the week she resigned, the most instinctively strategic legal mind he had worked with in 20 years. She called Richard on a Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after the miscarriage, while Daniel was at the gym. She kept her voice light. She said she was thinking about returning to practice, part-time at first, just to keep her hand in. Richard, who had never quite forgiven her for leaving, said there would always be a place for her. She thanked him and hung up and sat for a long moment with the phone in both hands, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, the specific, grounding sensation of standing on solid ground that belonged entirely to her. She went back quietly. Contract review at first, then a consulting role on a securities fraud case that Mercer and Holt had been building for 8 months. It was the consulting work that changed everything. The case involved a network of private trust accounts that had been manipulated over several years, funds redirected through a series of shell entities, paper trails deliberately muddied, beneficiaries kept ignorant, while someone with intimate access helped themselves. Elena reviewed the case files with the focused calm of a surgeon, and somewhere in the 3rd week of document review, a name appeared in the financial records that made her set down her coffee cup very carefully and read the page again. The name was Margaret Harlow. Not as a defendant, not yet. She appeared as a signatory, one of 3, on a management agreement for a private family trust. A trust Elena recognized because she had seen its account number before on a document Daniel had left on his desk 18 months ago that she had glanced at and thought nothing of and filed, away in the back of her mind, the way she filed everything, automatically, without knowing yet that she would one day need it. She said nothing. She told no one. She simply began, with the patience of someone who had spent years learning how to build an airtight case from the outside in, to pull the thread. She documented everything in a system she kept encrypted on a laptop Margaret didn't, purchased with cash from her own account. money from the small investment portfolio she had maintained privately throughout the marriage. Another instinct she was now grateful for. Every financial record she could legally access. Every date, every signature, every discrepancy between what the trust documents said and what the actual account movements showed. She worked in the early mornings and late nights, methodically, without anger clouding the architecture of what she was constructing. The anger was there. She was not without it. But she had learned, in 6 years of litigation, that anger was only useful when it was cold, when it had been compressed into something dense and precise, something you could place exactly where it would do the most damage. Hot anger made mistakes. Cold anger made cases. She was making a case. And she was, for the first time since she had watched Daniel stare at his dinner plate while his mother dismantled her dignity in front of 8 people, beginning to feel like herself again. Not the self she had been inside the marriage, accommodating, softened, slowly reduced. The self she had been before it. The one who walked into rooms and knew, without arrogance but without apology, exactly what she was capable of. That woman had never actually left. She had simply been waiting, with remarkable patience, for Elena to come back and find her. The gala was Margaret's idea, naturally. She had a gift for choosing venues that amplified her authority, and the Harlow Foundation's annual charity evening was her masterpiece. The Meridian Ballroom on the 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city like a kingdom spread out for inspection, 300 guests in black tie, a string quartet playing something European and tasteful near the bar. Margaret had been planning it for months. It was also, not coincidentally, the occasion she had chosen to publicly celebrate Daniel's appointment as regional director of Harlow Capital, a promotion that had come through Margaret's own board connections, a fact she intended everyone present to understand. Elena received the invitation like everyone else. Cream cardstock, embossed lettering, a small handwritten note from Margaret at the bottom that said, "Do come, darling." It would mean so much to Daniel. The handwriting was beautiful. It always was. She RSVP'd yes. She had been back at Mercer and Holt for 4 months by then, no longer consulting, no longer part-time. Richard had moved her onto the securities fraud case as lead associate counsel the moment the scope of what she had found became clear. The case had expanded significantly since Elena joined it. What had begun as a mid-sized fraud investigation into a network of mismanaged private trusts had grown, through Elena's document work, into something considerably more serious, a pattern of fiduciary misconduct spanning nearly a decade, implicating several high-net-worth individuals who had believed their family money was beyond scrutiny. Margaret Harlow was now a named subject in the investigation, had been for 6 weeks. Elena had recused herself from the direct evidentiary decisions involving Margaret. Ethics required it, and Elena's ethics were, unlike certain other things in her life, completely intact. But she had built the foundation. She had found the thread and followed it and handed it to people with subpoena power, and what they had pulled from that thread had been extraordinary. She dressed carefully the night of the gala, not to impress, not to wound. She wore a deep navy dress, simple and precisely fitted, the kind of thing that said, "I am not here to be looked at," while making it impossible to look away. No jewelry except her watch, her own, bought before the marriage, a slim vintage Cartier her mother had left her. She removed her wedding ring and placed it on the bathroom counter without ceremony. The way you set down something you've been carrying too long. The ballroom was already full when she arrived. She moved through it the way she moved through courtrooms, unhurried, oriented, reading the room before the room could read her. She saw Daniel near the bar, laughing with 2 men she didn't recognize, his face open and easy in the way it always was in public, that charming social fluency that had first made her fall in love with him. He saw her, and something moved across his expression. Relief, she thought, and underneath it something more complicated that she no longer had the interest to decode. Margaret was holding court near the windows, backlit by the city, precisely where the light was most flattering. She was magnificent in the way that certain dangerous things are magnificent. A tall ship, a storm front, an argument that sounds reasonable until you examine the premises. She caught Elena's eye across the room and smiled. The smile that arrived exactly on time. the one that revealed nothing. Elena smiled back. Then she turned toward the entrance, because the doors had opened, and the people she was expecting had arrived. Richard Ames entered first, with 2 colleagues from the firm's white-collar division. Behind them came a woman Elena knew well, Assistant U.S. Attorney Claire Voss, who had been coordinating with Mercer and Holt on the criminal referral for the past 3 weeks. They were not there in an official capacity tonight. They were guests, technically. But their presence in that room, in that company, meant something that anyone familiar with the case would immediately understand. Margaret understood it. Elena watched the exact moment it happened, the way Margaret's eyes moved from Richard to Claire to Elena, and the way the smile didn't disappear but shifted, almost imperceptibly, into something held together by effort rather than ease. A crack in the plaster, small, but Elena had been looking for it for months, and she recognized it instantly. Daniel crossed the room to Elena. He touched her arm. "You came," he said, as though this were a surprise, as though she were doing him a favor. "I wouldn't have missed it," she said. By 10 o'clock, 3 people in that ballroom had received calls from attorneys. By 10:30, Margaret had excused herself from her own gala and not returned. The string quartet kept playing. The city glittered beyond the glass. And Elena stood near the window where Margaret had been standing, holding a glass of sparkling water, and looked out at all that light spread across the dark, and felt the particular, irreplaceable peace of a woman who had done what she came to do, and was now, finally, ready to go home. To her own name, her own life, rebuilt from the ground up and belonging entirely to herself.